Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would review this little video and talk about this subject that I personally found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video by that of the boxing channel known as AKHi TV. And I am going to be releasing more videos this week. I do apologize for not being quite as active as what I usually have been. However, this conversation right here is pretty much going to be more than likely the final conversation that I have on this topic. Because Terence Crawford, of course, for those of you, for those of you that have watched boxing as of recently, Terence Crawford is debatably the number one pound for pound fighter in all the sport. Some people, of course, would say even the undisputed number one pound for pound fighter. But of course, the question is about Mr. Terence Crawford next is, what is he going to go after next? What is he going to be able to do, or who should he face within that of the next part of his career? Of course, certain people have talked about him possibly fighting Jaron Butzenis. Certain people have talked about him unifying that of the 154-pound weight class. Some people, of course, have even talked about him going up and possibly fighting that of Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez. Just in my personal view, when you talk about that possible fight of Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez, I just don't think that that's a fight that really should happen. And it isn't a fight that, in my view, that when you take a look at it on paper, that it's not particularly interesting. Because, of course, both fighters, in my view, when you talk about this past generation, you could talk about both of those fighters debatably being the greatest of this past generation, being the past decade. But at the end of the day, I'm just not a huge fan of fights. I'm not a person that really supports fights or loves to see fights to where basically one fighter, if they end up winning the fight, they can get all the credit in the world, and basically, they can reap all the benefits and the rewards. But if the other one wins, basically they get no credit whatsoever. And that's pretty much exactly what is going to happen if Terence Crawford fights out of Canelo Alvarez, which of course, I believe the Saudi, or wherever the man's from, Mr. Turkey Al-Shi, whatever his name is, of course, he has tried to bully Canelo Alvarez into trying to take that fight. That is not going to work. If Canelo Alvarez wants to take that fight, of course he'll take that fight. But the thing is, overall, is that Turkey Al-Shi is not going to bully or embarrass Canelo Alvarez into a Terence Crawford fight. He's not going to. Canelo Alvarez can make a multitude of other fights out there, and he doesn't necessarily need that of a Turkey Al-Shi. Now, that being said, Canelo Alvarez in his next fight against that of Edgar Berlanga, I do expect the numbers to be lesser than what they were in the past, because even though, of course, that is a very good card, because there's some very good undercard fights, such as Araceli Lara versus Danny Garcia, and such as some other fighters on that card, that maybe I'm not remembering at the current moment in time. It's a very decent card, but when you take a look at the headliner, Canelo Alvarez versus Edgar Berlanga, it is not, in my view, a card that is really worth paying for, at least when you talk about a mega pay-per-view. And of course, a lot of people are going to try, and promote it as the undefeated Puerto Rican prospect who's a quote-unquote knockout artist in Edgar Berlanga. Listen, at the end of the day, I've seen Edgar Berlanga in his past few fights. There's nothing, in my view, to suggest him really having a realistic chance over Canelo Alvarez. And that's why Canelo Alvarez right now is receiving a decent amount of criticism, and very well warranted. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to call yourself debatably the best boxer, the best fighter in the world, or the best boxer on the planet, and if you're going to, overall still retain all those titles at the 168-pound weight class, you are going to have to fight the best guys there. And I think that Jaime Munguia, of course, I think that that was a very good fight. I think that I would give him the grade of A minus, but Jaime Munguia only had about one or two fights there. The two fights that everybody really wants to see is David Benavidez and David Morrell. And Canelo Alvarez, if he is going to not receive any more criticism, he is going to have to fight one of those two guys. It just is what it is. Either that or give up the belts and go back down to 160 pounds. Because personally, in my view, I would not mind seeing Canelo Alvarez versus that of a Janabek. I wouldn't mind seeing that fight whatsoever. But of course, that being stated, people who are Terence Crawford fans, they're talking about the potentiality of there being a Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez fight. Well, now they're going on to the next potential best thing, which is Terence Crawford versus Gennady Triple G Golovkin, which is a fight that, in my view, really doesn't really have that much appeal, especially at this point in time in both of their careers, or especially in Gennady Golovkin's career. But, it is what it is. Anyways, Mr. AKHi TV is going to talk about it, And what you're going to notice once again is the complete difference of energy changes when all of a sudden it comes to the potentiality of how good Gennady Golovkin actually is. Because we all know that whenever it comes to the excuse of Canelo Alvarez fighting Gennady Golovkin, that it apparently has an asterisk right next to it because Canelo Alvarez fought Gennady Golovkin and beat him in the rematch when he was 36 years old. But Gennady Golovkin is over 40 years old right now. And I'm going to wonder if there's going to be a potential asterisk if Crawford ends up actually beating that of a Gennady Golovkin in their potential fight. Is there going to be an asterisk? And as we can clearly tell from the signs, the answer is a very resounding no, because at the end of the day, you're going to see some of the standards that AKHi TV holds, compared to Crawford and compared to Canelo. Remember when Canelo fought Gennady Golovkin in the trilogy, even when he fought him in the rematch, Gennady Golovkin was older. He was not in his prime. He was a guy that was completely washed by that of the third fight. That's what they like to say. But take a look at the energy change within this video when it comes to the fight of a possibility between Gennady Golovkin and Terence Bud Crawford. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's see what they have to say.
Well, the rumors around town is that Turkey offered Triple G to fight Terence Bud Crawford in 2025. Recently, Triple G was doing an interview and they asked him, "How is the retired life treating you?" That's when Triple G responded with, "I'm not retired yet. In fact, I still feel like I'm in my best." So for
Well, Gennady Golovkin might as well be retired because at the end of the day, the man ended up turning down the Araceli Lara fight. The man has no longer any belts at the middleweight division. What are you necessarily doing in the sport, Mr. Gennady Golovkin? At the end of the day, the man is basically done at this point. He hasn't fought ever since 2022. The last fight that he had, he lost very clearly, in my view, to Canelo Alvarez. I thought that the fight, really, to be quite honest with you, was not even relatively close. A lot of people thought that the fight was close. To be honest with you, I thought that Gennady Golovkin won about 3 rounds at most within that fight. Of course, there was the one round that he had that was very good later on, but Gennady Golovkin did not look good in that fight. It's just that he was able to survive over that of Canelo Alvarez. But what do I personally think about a Crawford versus Gennady Golovkin fight? I mean, it's a fight that would somewhat be relatively interesting, but I don't think that it would be interesting enough overall for this fight to really garner enough attention. Gennady Golovkin, of course, is pretty much nowhere near his best anymore. He really hasn't been ever since he lost to Canelo Alvarez in that rematch. And Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, I understand why he wants Canelo Alvarez, but at the end of the day, let's not push for this fight if we're not going to have a little bit of stakes for both of them on the table. Because a fight really, in my personal view, should not be happening whatsoever if one side is going to reap all the potential benefits and rewards and the other side is just not going to benefit from them whatsoever. So a lot of these Terence Bud Crawford fans, they want this Canelo Alvarez fight to happen because, of course, if Crawford ends up defeating that at Canelo Alvarez, then Terence Bud Crawford gets to call himself debatably the greatest fighter ever. But if Canelo Alvarez ends up defeating Terence Bud Crawford, basically they're just going to state, well, you should have because it was the size and it was this and it was that. Right, so then what really is the appeal for that fight? Unless you're really a Terence Bud Crawford fan and you just want the potentiality of Crawford to reap all the rewards and the benefits from this fight. That's why, in my view, it's just not a fight that's really appealing enough.
Was you to say that? Clearly, he still has some fight in him. And the Crawford fight might be the one.
Clearly, he still has fight left in him. Isn't this very interesting, once again, how AKHi TV is trying to make this sound better? Now that Crawford is apparently about to fight that of Gennady Golovkin, or at least was offered the fight. Isn't that very interesting? Because when we heard from about Canelo Alvarez, he beat a 36-year-old Gennady Golovkin, so we can't count that, he beat a Gennady Golovkin that was out of his prime. He beat a Gennady Golovkin that, was starting to age. That's what we heard. And then in the third fight, which Gennady Golovkin definitely was aged within that fight, basically Gennady was slow and he looked nowhere near the same and blah, 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 all this other stuff. Right, but Gennady Golovkin is now, what, two years older, when it comes down to it. And now all of a sudden, clearly Gennady Golovkin still has some left within him. He says he's at his best. This is the type of bullshit, overall, once again, that a lot of boxing fans overall try to pull. And a big part of the reason why I like to review certain videos, and AKHi TV, the LDBC, and New Media, they love to do this. And don't get it twisted, old media loves to do this as well. Quote unquote old media, where they do this with certain fighters, where they'll tear down an opponent of Terence Bud Crawford and state that this guy was washed up or worn down. But then when it comes to another fighter of a fighter that they're trying to tear down, or that they want to uplift, then all of a sudden that guy was in their prime, or that guy was a champion, that guy was this. So once again, Let's not try to revise history here, or let's try to keep the same standards, please. At the end of the day, Gennady Golovkin is nowhere near what he once was. He hasn't been, really, to be quite honest with you, for years.
That gets him up one last time. On the other hand, Crawford told Turkey the only fight he's interested in is the Canelo fight. However, apparently, Crawford is also interested in Triple G, because Turkey is not going to be sending Triple G an offer if Crawford is not interested. One thing for sure, if this fight ends up coming to fruition, this will be Crawford's first time in a long time fighting someone older than him. He's going to have the luxury of being the younger fighter. As you guys know, recently when Crawford fought Madrimov and Errol Spence, obviously he was the older guy. So this time around, he's not going to have that disadvantage. However, the disadvantage he's going to have fighting Triple G is that he has to move up another weight division. That's right, Crawford has to move up to his 5th weight class in order to fight Triple G, one of the hardest punchers at 160. We all know the last thing that goes away as a fighter is the power, and Triple G has plenty of that. He's also going to be the stronger guy, Triple G that is. So Crawford does have some obstacles fighting Triple G.
Right, but once again, Mr. AKHi TV, let's not let's not overall once again try to pussyfoot around here. At the end of the day, Gennady Golovkin is 40-something years old. The man has not fought in over a year. The man has no belts whatsoever at this point in time in his career. He is not the same fighter as what he once was. I just personally, just in my personal view, I don't think that a lot of people really have a particular interest within this fight. I mean, I think people would watch it, but you know, of course, this fight would be on pay-per-view. I do not personally believe that this would be a fight that a lot of people would really want to see. You know, just personally, for what purpose? If Gennady Golovkin ends up winning this fight, Gennady Golovkin, you know, overall people are going to say that Gennady Golovkin, of course, was a size too big for that of Terence Crawford. And then, of course, that pretty much ruins the Canelo Alvarez fight. And then that pretty much ruins Terence Crawford. Because if he ends up losing the Gennady Golovkin fight, it's more than likely not going to be by decision. It's more than likely going to be by by a very painful stoppage. Or more than likely because he's not going to be the same after this fight. Or even if he does end up winning this fight, there's a possibility that he may not be quite the same. Because Gennady Golovkin, once again, even for his age, yes, he's still going to be very, very powerful. You know, but once again, I just don't have a particular interest in this fight. In my personal view, I would much rather see Terence Crawford fight at the lower weight class of 154 and see him try to unify that weight class.
I can see why Crawford wants to fight Triple G, because that's Canelo Alvarez's best win on his resume, even though he tested positive for PEDs. Therefore, it sounds like...
Right, people can keep mentioning that Canelo Alvarez, once again, that he tested positive for PEDs. And at the end of the day, Canelo is going to have to deal with that criticism. That is, you know, something that Canelo's always going to have to deal with. Because at the end of the day, other fighters did not get tested positive for that of a PED. Or did not get popped for a PED. But if we're also going to talk about Mr. Terence Crawford, the man's with the snack program. So it is what it is. I mean, people can state all they want to, but at the end of the day, anyone who works with the snack program, whether it be Devin Haney, Terence Crawford, Shakur Stevenson, Caleb Plant, Demetrius Bubo Andrade, you know, other fighters. There was a recent fighter that I recently seen there that was with the snack program, but I don't remember who. Anyone who's with the snack program, once again, they are on PEDs.
If Crawford can't get Canelo, then he's going to go after the next best thing. And that's Triple G. There's no secret. Triple G is coming off a loss to Canelo Alvarez in a trilogy fight where he performed well in. He did not win.
No, he really didn't perform well in it all. Once again, people tried to really overbloat how Gennady Golovkin really did in the trilogy against Canelo Alvarez. He pretty much lost every single round within that fight. The scorecards were way too close. Canelo Alvarez really, at a minimum, won that fight 9-3. That fight was never close whatsoever, if you know how to score a boxing fight. No, Gennady Golovkin did not look good within that fight. He looked like a complete shell of himself. A complete shell of himself. But it's just completely interesting because that's what AKHi TV and a certain amount of these guys were stating, is that Canelo Alvarez really did not look super duper impressive against a shell of Gennady Golovkin, which is somewhat true because Canelo Alvarez, of course, he probably should have been able to knock that out of Gennady Golovkin, but Canelo, in my view, has been aging now for a few years. He's been aging now for the past few years. The last great performance that I've seen Canelo Alvarez have, at least at his absolute peak, was against that of a Caleb Plant. He's not really at his absolute peak anymore. It's starting to drop off. And Gennady Golovkin definitely is nowhere near his best anymore. I'm not going to claim that he's a B grade level fighter necessarily, but I really don't know how good he is at this point because, once again, the man has no belts. He relinquished every single one of them. He hasn't fought in over a year. And on top of that, he's about 41 years old. So let's not try to promote this into this mega fight or Terence Bud Crawford beating a really great version of Gennady Golovkin. But it's just very interesting, once again, how AKHi is trying to frame it now that Crawford might be potentially fighting that of Gennady Golovkin. And Crawford is one of his favorite fighters, one of his favorite pro-blackity black fighters. So he has to try and promote it in a better light than what he would if it were under a different circumstance. And a Canelo fighting a Gennady Golovkin or someone else fighting a Gennady Golovkin.
However, he didn't look bad either. Canelo Alvarez promised to knock out Triple G, however, he was unsuccessful doing so. In fact, Triple G even managed to win the later rounds after Canelo Alvarez gassed out.
Well, he won a couple, but really not that many later rounds. Once again, people try to act like that fight was like 7 rounds to 5. That fight really was not that competitive.
Felt that he performed so bad that he had to claim an injury after the fight, which means Triple G still got it. However, it remains to be seen if he's going to fight Crawford or not.
No, Triple G still does not have it. But at the end of the day, once again, AKHi TV has to claim now that Gennady Golovkin still has it because Terence Bud Crawford might potentially be able to benefit from this reward. That's the reason why he now has to claim that Gennady Golovkin still has it. No, Gennady Golovkin still does not have it. Let's stop trying to promote this bullshit and let Terence Bud Crawford go after 154, where he personally belongs, and he'd be able to accomplish history. Don't go up and fight at Canelo Alvarez unless you're able to actually unify that of the 154-pound weight class, and that fight actually makes sense. I understand why Terence Bud Crawford is going after Canelo Alvarez, but at the end of the day, it's like, dude, nobody wants to see that fight. And I know that, there's going to be some Terence Bud Crawford fanboys down in my comment section saying, what are you talking about? Canelo Alvarez keeps ducking and avoiding the smoke with Terence Bud Crawford. Everyone wants to see that fight. Nobody really gives a shit about that fight. Nobody cares to see Terence Bud Crawford fighting a Canelo Alvarez that is 20 plus pounds bigger than him, and a guy overall that more than likely is going to whoop his ass for a continuous 12 rounds if it even lasts that long. It is what it is. And I'm not saying that Crawford may potentially, possibly could not beat Canelo Alvarez, but I would give it a very slim chance. At a most, I would give him about a 20% chance, especially after looking at him in the Israel Madrimov fight. I mean, Madrimov overall was giving him hell in that fight. And don't get it twisted. I thought that Crawford won the fight, but it really wasn't as dominant as what I thought overall it was going to be. I did not think Crawford looked super sharp in that fight. Maybe it was because he had not fought in a year, but I do not think that the added muscle mass nor the added weight really gained overall in terms of a positive of his impact in the ring or in terms of, his danger level in the ring. And I think that Canelo Alvarez, I just think that combined with the skill and combined with the size, it would just be a little bit too much. And once again, if Canelo beats Terence Bud Crawford, great. Is Canelo Alvarez really going to get any credit for that fight? What really is the appeal for that fight? The only appeal of it is to see if Terence Bud Crawford can possibly, go beyond his limits, which is great. But at the end of the day, no one really wants to see that fight. What people really want to see is Terence Bud Crawford try to unify that of the 154-pound weight class, maybe make a jump up to 160, but no one really wants to see a Canelo versus Crawford fight, at least not a whole lot of people, and of course people want to see Canelo in the ring against David Benavidez versus David Morrell. So in my view, Crawford versus Canelo is just a fight that doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you're a Terence Bud Crawford fan.
Or if he's going to be willing to fight Crawford.
Especially after taking a look at his performance against Israel Madrimov. Personally, I scored that fight about 7 rounds to 5, maybe 8 rounds to 4 for Terence Bud Crawford. But after rewatching it, I think about 7 rounds to 5. But I just don't think that Terence Bud Crawford, I don't think that he looked quite that good in that fight. I think that, of course, he still looked, relatively good. But I don't think that, it was as impressive as a debut as you would need to have in order to possibly justify a fight against Canelo Alvarez. But we'll see.
Or not. I mean, it would have had been better if Triple G kept his titles and Crawford was moving up in weight to fight Triple G for his titles, because that would have gave Crawford a motive to do so, to become a 5th division world champion. But at the moment in time, Crawford will be moving up in weight, risking it all to fight Triple G for nothing outside of his name and money. That's definitely going to be on the line. However, there's no belt on the line, so Crawford can't make history By doing so, joining.
Right, but once again, Mr. AKHi TV, let's not play games around here. At the end of the day, when it came to Canelo fighting Sergey Kovalev, and that was even when Sergey Kovalev was a champion, by the way, all we heard about was how Sergey Kovalev was completely washed up. Once again, all we hear about whenever it comes to Canelo or a fighter that they don't like, oh, he beat this guy when he was off a year layoff. Oh, he beat this guy when he was washed up when he was 36 years old. Oh, he beat this guy when this happened. He beat this guy under this circumstance. Right, so then why are the same standards not applied here? All of a sudden, the energy changed from AKHi TV. Oh, Gennady Golovkin clearly still has it. Right, at about 41 years old, and a fighter that hasn't fought in over a year, and a dude that really lost in dominating fashion, although probably not as dominant as what he should have lost against Canelo in the third fight. You're really trying to spew this bullshit? Like, come on.
Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, and Oscar De La Hoya, becoming a 5th division world champ. Either way, this is a mega fight. If Canelo doesn't fight Crawford, even though Turkey offered Canelo his biggest payday to do so, his biggest payday of all time to fight Crawford, around $100 million guaranteed, then apparently Triple G is the target. We shall see if Triple G wants some.
And once again, let me state this, because of course AKHi TV and many people are saying that, oh, Canelo is ducking the Terence Bud Crawford offer. Well, listen, if you're going to go by that opinion, then okay, I don't really have a problem with that. If you want to go off of that, that's up to you. But if we're going to go off of that, then if that fight ends up happening, and if Canelo Alvarez ends up dominating Terence Bud Crawford, because you believe that Terence Bud Crawford is that great, and you believe that he's on Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s level, and you believe overall that he's like that, then if Canelo Alvarez ends up winning that fight, that must mean that something is going to have to go in Canelo Alvarez's basket in terms of legacy points. So that's what that's going to have to mean. If you want that fight to happen so badly, and if you believe that that fight is allegedly that big of a fight that needs to be made, no problem. But then don't just have Terence Bud Crawford reap all the benefits and the rewards from that fight. Have Canelo Alvarez overall have a little bit of legacy points as well. And if not, then there's really no reason for that fight to happen.
Of that Bud smoke. With that being said, go ahead and drop your thoughts on this fight in the comment section below. Subscribe below.
But that pretty much is about it for today. I just thought that I would talk about that. Personally, do I think that a Gennady Golovkin versus Terence Bud Crawford fight is that appealing? No, personally, I don't. Because not only is Gennady Golovkin, in my view, way out of his prime, when it comes down to it, the last great Gennady Golovkin, to be quite honest with you, that I've seen was against Canelo Alvarez in the rematch. I think in about 2017. That was the last great Gennady Golovkin that I had seen. After that, I don't think that he was ever quite the same fighter. I think that he had decreased in level a little bit. But it is what it is. It would be a relatively interesting fight. I just don't think that it's a fight that, in my view, needs to happen. I would much rather be more interested, or I would rather, the fights happen more at 154 to see if Crawford can become the first and only 3-time undisputed champion within that of 3 weight classes. In my view, that's much more intriguing. And then if he can do that, then maybe a Canelo Alvarez fight, then maybe it's in store. But at the end of the day, Canelo is going to have to eventually fight either David Morrell or David Benavidez or one of those guys there, or relinquish the titles at 168 pounds. And Terence Bud Crawford, he's going to have to try to fight the guys at 154. No one wants to see you fight a 42-year-old Gennady Golovkin. No one cares. It is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. But I thought that I would talk about that because even though I can see why Terence Bud Crawford is taking these fights, just in my personal view, if he wants more legacy points, in my personal view, I actually don't think that Gennady Golovkin is the way to go. Because I think that a lot of people are already going to believe that Gennady Golovkin, that he is not at his best. He has no titles at this point in time in his career. And on top of that, the man hasn't fought in over a year. And every one of those things would be relevant to bring up. Because the man is not even a champion. Like when people bring up Canelo once again, fighting guys allegedly out of their prime, or guys that are completely washed up allegedly, like when Sergey Kovalev was. And it's true that Sergey Kovalev was not at his absolute peak anymore. That is absolutely true. But at the end of the day, Sergey Kovalev was at least a champion when Canelo Alvarez had fought him. When Crawford fought guys like that overall, once again, of a Kell Brook and Amir Khan, and if he fights Gennady Golovkin, like these guys aren't even champions anymore. Like these guys are done. Their soul is basically done in terms of a boxing career. So that's the difference. That's how, once again, that's the difference between someone that might be out of their peak or out of their prime, but someone that's still a relatively dangerous fighter, because they can still win a belt within a certain weight class, and someone overall that is literally completely done and their soul has been taken from the sport. Kell Brook's soul was completely done after he lost to Errol Spence Jr. Amir Khan's soul was done and taken after he got knocked out against Canelo Alvarez. And when you talk about overall, once again, Gennady Golovkin, his soul, I'm not going to say that his soul, but overall, basically, a lot of the soul that he had was taken out against Canelo Alvarez in the rematch, and now it's even more taken out after he lost to Canelo in the trilogy. So no one really wants to see this fight. It is what it is. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. In my view, what are the fights that I'd like to see Crawford in next? I'm hearing that there's the potentiality of him versus Virgil Ortiz. I would love to see Crawford fight one of the champions there, whoever the other champion is, maybe a Tim Tszyu, but I would love to see him try to unify the weight class. Because there's no offense, but I really don't I really don't give a shit about him overall fighting that of a Gennady Golovkin. If you're gonna fight overall a middleweight fighter, maybe one of the champions, maybe. And if we're going to compare him to Canelo, and talk about Canelo's loss to Dimitri Bivol, well, if we're gonna compare that in a similar light, then let's have Terence Crawford fight that of a Janibek at 160 pounds. Because that's really the only way that you could measure that in a similar light if we want to compare Canelo and Terence Crawford. And if Crawford ends up winning that fight, then we can for certain say that he's above Canelo in my view. But we'll see about that. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later, and we'll see where this goes.